The Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador is promising urgent action to address the province's dire financial situation. The province's total provincial debt, that's all government agencies, is currently $47 billion. To address that, Andrew Furey says his government will raise taxes on people he says can afford it. In a video released yesterday, Furey says they will also review public sector salaries and eliminate bonuses. This comes in response to the Moya Green report, which outlined the province's financial situation. Andrew Furey joins me now from St. John's. Premier Andrew Furey, welcome back to the show.
Hi, David. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm wondering, I'm looking at what Moya Green has given you, a series of extensive cost-cutting recommendations, double-digit cuts to healthcare, to post-secondary education, wage rollbacks for the public service, tax hikes across the board. She wants you to go pretty far. How far are you prepared to go?
Well, as you know, David, and as I'm sure all your viewers know, Newfoundland and Labrador is in a tough spot. So we're prepared to go fairly far. I mean, whatever we do, these are recommendations, and they're going to be balanced and measured, and need to make sure that the cure is not worse than the disease, of course. But, you know, we have to act, and we have to act now in order to get our fiscal house in order.
When you say you have to act now, does this mean starting in the next budget, which should be coming, I guess, sometime May, June, before the legislature rises for the summer?
Yeah, I mean, these are, you know, this is a financial reality, despite the weight and length of the report that we knew we were up against. It's nice that it's packaged in one spot. So there will be some action in the budget that is perhaps coincidence, or but we are looking at a 5-year strategy. There's no one budget that's going to fix the fiscal situation for Newfoundland and Labrador. And frankly, I think that would be wrong. So it took us, 5, 10, 15 years arguably to get here. And it's going to take us a while to get out of it. But if we don't start, we're going to be far worse in 5 or 10 years.
You know, I remember back in 2003, former Premier Danny Williams doing what you did last night, a State of the Province address, and he had an urgent warning for the public sector unions at that time, saying there's simply no money for pay raises. You're going to have to accept a wage freeze. Moya Green thinks you don't just need to freeze wages, you need to legislate a rollback because salaries are such a big part of your cost structure. Is that something you're prepared to do?
We respect the collective bargaining process, and we're willing to sit down with the unions to create a path forward. I mean, this isn't us versus them. We're all Newfoundlanders and Labradorians, and we have the responsibility of the position that we're in right now, and we equally own the responsibility of how we move forward. So I'm looking forward to getting down with the unions and sitting with them and seeing what they're prepared to do as we try to navigate these tough waters moving forward. But there's no question there's going to be pain that has to be distributed amongst all of us equally. And I've said from the beginning, I believe that we can do this without massive layoffs, and I stand by that. Without
massive layoffs, but can you guarantee that you won't do a wage rollback? I guess is a question a lot of employees are going to have, right? I know you say it's not us versus them, but ultimately you're the Premier and you're going to have to make this decision in conjunction with your cabinet and caucus.
Absolutely, and we're weighing all those options right now. I mean, the report's only a week old, so we're looking at our own analytics and doing an analysis to see what's best for the province and the balancing act that is the province, not just one line of a 300-page report.
But there's a recommendation for, I think it's a 20 or 25% cut to healthcare spending, which is, that's hundreds of millions of dollars. I mean, could you even contemplate doing something of that magnitude in the health system in Newfoundland and Labrador?
Well, first of all, that's over 5 years. And secondly, we've been doing a reasonable job, if you look at some reports from independent institutions like CD Howe, about keeping our healthcare expenditures flat. While other provinces and jurisdictions increase by about 6% per year, we've been fairly flat. So I'm confident that there's still efficiencies to be had in the healthcare system, and we'll look at that because right now, of course, as we know, the demographics have changed substantively in Newfoundland and Labrador, and consequently, I'm not sure that the healthcare system is providing the services it needs to provide to the changed community. So we need to make sure that we're doing things differently to provide those services more efficiently. And where we do find savings in healthcare, we're reinvesting that in the social determinants of health, which is the economic equation that will ultimately bear fruit long term and change the fiscal envelope.
I wonder if I can get your sense of just how urgent and immediate the financial crisis is, because I remember a year ago doing a story on the letter that your predecessor, Dwight Ball, wrote to the Prime Minister saying that the province to run into a debt wall. It couldn't borrow to complete its short-term borrowing program. It was going to be out of cash by about the middle of April last year. And the Bank of Canada stepped in and started buying provincial bonds. But that's going to wind down, or has wound down. So where is Newfoundland and Labrador in terms of its ability to borrow to cover costs? I mean, do you have to go back to market to do that? Can you go back to market and do that?
I believe we can. Certainly, you know, what's compounded when what's happened, as you know, in the market since that action occurred about a year ago, is that the whole world is in a similar situation with respect to borrowing and lower interest costs. So the global market has changed, and that's provided us with some relief. But we need to use that time right now to ensure we're getting our financial house in order, because I believe that this low cost of borrowing is not going to be sustained for long. I do think that despite, and some may argue, and I'm open to it, that inflation is not going to set in. I'm not sure that that's true. So we need to make sure that we're putting our fiscal house in order to contemplate even raising interest rates. And that's why the action is so urgent today.
Right. There's the low cost of borrowing, but your government has a high rate of borrowing, right? Borrowing to make interest payments on pre-existing debt each and every year, which is clearly not a sustainable thing. So when you look at that—
It is not.
And you look at oil being, the future of oil being very questionable right now with the way the world is going. I mean, when you look at the numbers and you look at the structural challenge you face, is there a risk of Newfoundland and Labrador going bankrupt if you don't make the serious structural change?
Well, we're prepared to make serious structural change, and I'm not going to see this province go bankrupt. I think that the people of Newfoundland and Labrador are strong enough to realize and educated enough to realize the position that we're in, and they're ready to change the trajectory of this province. There is no question about it. The debt, as you correctly pointed out, is unbearable. We're borrowing just to pay interest. We have, you know, if you look at it critically, we're borrowing $1.5 billion a year just to pay interest. You know, that's push. And then you add on a potential headache of Muskrat Falls rate mitigation payments. You're well over $2 billion, and we have nothing to show for it. We need to pay down that debt. And we need to do so by looking at, you know, different mechanisms and policy instruments, that some of which Dame Moya Green highlighted, including evaluating our asset portfolio and whether that's appropriate right now, and whether there is opportunity in exercising that portfolio to pay down some of the debt, so that we can get that debt back to a manageable piece and not have to borrow, as you suggest, just to pay interest, which is completely irresponsible.
So you mentioned Muskrat Falls, and just for people who don't know the long saga of that, I mean, this is a hydro project that's over budget, behind schedule. It's going to, technically, it's supposed to go online later this year, and then the rate mitigation payments you talk about is about $500 million or more a year just to stop electricity rates from becoming unaffordable for people. So you're in negotiations with the federal government now on trying some sort of restructuring of Muskrat Falls to try to alleviate that problem. What are the consequences for Newfoundland and Labrador if you don't get a good arrangement with the federal government and stack that burden on top of the other ones you've just outlined?
Oh, well, they're dire. I mean, you know, Muskrat Falls started at 6.7 and has escalated and gone over budget and over time. And of course, it's approaching, you know, $14 billion. And we just simply can't bear that debt load. Right now, that's hidden in a government, you know, to some extent, because it's in a Crown Corp. The reality is we own that corp, and subsequently we need to assume that debt, or certainly the responsibility of it. So we need to make sure that we are working with the federal government. Don't forget, the federal government did 2 loan guarantees on this. Loan guarantees aren't without consequences either. So I'm confident that we can, with the solid working relationship that we have with the Federation right now, that we can create a sustainable deal on a green, clean hydroelectric project that can be used as an example to the rest of Atlantic Canada, how to transition off bunker crude and other non-renewable energy sources. Because even though this project has been over budget and a bit out of our reach, not a bit, well out of our reach as a province, these are problems that other Atlantic provinces and arguably some jurisdictions in the northeastern seaboard are currently having to tackle right now as they transition to a green energy source. We have an abundance of green, clean energy here in Newfoundland and Labrador. This project, of course, has not served us well to date, but we need to leverage that in the negotiations with the federal government, and recognizing that this could be a part of the Atlantic Loop, and frankly, the Churchill River can be a part of the Atlantic Loop.
I just have one last question before we let you go.
Sure.
Much of your workforce is public sector in Newfoundland and Labrador, and so much of it is unionized. Obviously, the menu of options on the table for the province are going to be unpopular and difficult. So how confident are you can get the labor groups on board and the broader public on board for the tough choices you have to make?
Yeah, I get the sense, David, that most people in the public right now understand the weight and the gravity of the fiscal reality of Newfoundland and Labrador. I believe that the public understand our position and are willing and wanting of leaders from elected and non-elected alike, and unions and government leaders to come together to take the definitive actions we need to take in order to save this province. I mean, this is not about being reelected. This is a crusade to save the province, and that's one that I'm prepared to undertake, and I'm sure I'm not alone in that leadership profile throughout the province.
Okay. Premier Furey, thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, David.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.